This is Team Worf project activity vlog number 3. We're just going to go through all of our diagrams, starting with our model view controller architecture diagram. So if you can see here, I guess standard with MVC, we split it off into our 3 parts. And I guess alongside that, we decided to go with our 3 main functions, really. Mostly that there's a file viewer, a file editor, and a file chat. And each one of those has its own analog in each little separated concern. You know, there's a view section for viewing the files, editing them, and for the chat. And each one of those sections has its own part in the model and its own database. And each one has its own section of code for controlling each one of the functions that it's in. As well, any view element outside of that, just from going between the other, also counts as a controller upon interaction from the user.
Next, we'll talk about the use case diagrams that highlight the process. So we have use case diagrams for the file viewer, the file editor, and the chat box. The colored circles here just show common pages that the user might find themselves on between each of the diagrams. And as in this case for the file viewer, shows the different things you can do from the file viewer. So this is where students can view their files and folders. The file editor is where students actually create new notes or edit existing ones. And the chat box window is where they would be able to chat with other users and flag comments as notes. The next diagrams we have are the data flow diagrams showing our data, of course. So the first diagram is kind of a light diagram, almost a diagram for diagram's sake, but it was already completed to mention to keep it in. So we'll talk about the second diagram, which shows us the data messaging that we think will happen when we undergo the making notes activity and the sharing notes activity. So as you can see, each data flow process has been labeled A, B, C, D, E. Now this doesn't show any kind of order. It just shows what messaging flow belongs to each other. So for example, A messaging flow is there. B messaging flow happens over here, C, and so on and so forth. So this diagram got a little complicated, but it shows both the making and sharing notes messaging processes.
All right, so the next thing is the class diagram. A class diagram is a flowchart where we have to identify the members, attributes, and the methods of the classes. For us, it made more sense to use simple arrows to represent the relationships. And instead of following the UML rules, we use that. We have tried to keep it as simple as possible. I'll talk about some key features of the diagram. The user is able to create and manipulate the operations and has access to other features such as the viewer, the note editor, and the chat viewer. And all of these 3 classes work by requesting data from the database. The chat viewer has a chat log class as well that it can display and modify. All of this information is stored in the database class. That is where the notes that are taken, the folders containing the notes, and the user information.
So I guess the next thing would be our lo-fi interface sketches. I guess just looking at them, it's sort of your standard thing. Just a little bit of each each individual site's layout. Even though it might be a bit outside of our minimum viable product, we also included a bit about the sign-up page. I guess as you can see, we just sort of made a little bit for every single one of them and just a rough layout. So I guess that sort of covers it. And finally, I guess the last thing, just touching on that from the sign up, is our GitHub and our Kanban board. And if we look at it, you can see that we actually upped it a little bit. We split off the previous, what used to be in our minimum viable product, the part about being able to take notes and save them on a laptop so they're accessible online. We figured that would require having an account and having the whole account sign up login system set up. And since that isn't really necessary for our product to work, at least in a minimum level, we decided to split that off into just being able to take notes on the laptop And if we have more time, having the account set up and taking notes on the account as, in the backlog.
All right, to answer the reflection questions as a team, we like the diagrams for this activity, but the class diagrams still seem somewhat strange to us. However, we are most proud of our data flow diagrams and the class diagram that we made, as those took the most time and the effort to create. As for the communication, once again, it was the key, and we are getting better at it, making things run more smoothly as we progress forward. Hopefully, in the future, we get more exposure to the UML diagrams and thus we get better at it. But for now, we would surely use some help to create detailed version of diagrams if they are necessary. For this activity, we have designed them in a way that makes sense to us.
Right, and that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening.